Hello, my customer success friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the CSM Practice Podcast, where we bring you the best thought leaders and customer success executives to talk about things that actually work in their business, tactics and strategies that amplify everything that we do. And today we're going to talk about how to turn the ship from being a cost center to a profit center. Yes, you heard me right. What does it take to turn your team from just working on adoption and churn risk to actually owning the renewals and upsells? What does it take to turn that team around? I bet it's more than just strategies and playbooks. Today I have Marija Skobe-Pilley, which almost all of you should know by now. She's a renowned, award-winning customer success professional. She has a very, very popular podcast, which you should all subscribe to. It's the Women in Customer Success, where she interviews inspiring women in the business that work on customer success strategies and managing teams. And they talk about their career and what works for them and everything else that would inspire you as well. And she's the co-founder and a principal as a fractional CS leader in Fractional SaaS. Marija, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Irit. When I started my podcast and my career in customer success, I didn't know you or anyone else yet, but then you became like the first CS guru that other leaders were telling me about. So a huge, huge part of my career growth and career journey in customer success are you. And thank you so much for carrying on doing these interviews so many other people can learn from you.
So today we're going to talk about what you do when you don't have your podcast, which is being a fractional CS leader. Tell me a little bit about that. When did you start and how did you get into it?
I started fractional consultancy just exactly around a year ago with my co-founder, Kate. Somehow we both knew that we wanted to do something similar. We left our jobs. There were a few different circumstances in our cases. And as we started talking about our ideas and what we wanted to do, we just clicked and realized, well, that's exactly what we both connected on, what we both believe in, and we started working on our value proposition, starting getting customers. It's been only a year. It feels like it's been longer simply because we both have so much more leadership experience prior to the consultancy. So everything seems so natural. Sometimes, at least in my case, when your gut feeling is telling you that, that's the direction you need to take and things just fall into the place. I think that was exactly in our case. I am enjoying so much being in a position of fractionally working with different companies, because in that way I can immediately bring so much more experiences to more people than rather if that was the case if I was only a leader in one company. Like, there is so many similarities and so many different energy working in this way. And yeah, I just feel blessed that I had the opportunity to do it and to make a move.
Now, most of the customers that you work with are absolutely software companies. Would you specialize in SaaS, on-prem, or doesn't matter?
It's mostly SaaS, and those will be early stage companies up to Series A, sometimes up to Series B, but pretty much young companies, startups.
Very young. So usually do they have a customer success team in place when you start working with them?
Most of those companies would have somebody, some small teams that are responsible for customers. In some cases, they are already called customer success. In some cases, not, but it's typically those few people managing everything. And that's when we come on board and help them figure out what their customer success or customer experience team should look like and what are those specialties that they should start developing. Because very often we are seeing that transition from working with a product, most likely just onboarding customers or being like a support, and then they need to start looking into renewals. And it's been a few years since they've been managing renewals, and now they need more resources and more capabilities. So we come on board in those situations to create kind of the customer success operating model for them, to create methodology and strategy that could work for them in the coming years. And then we'd help them put some of the leaders in place as well so that they are all sorted.
What we've talked about before we started recording is that you said one of the things that you do for them is actually transition the team for being more support and service focused to owning the renewals and upsells.
Yes, and I would draw this from like several cases of experiences, either with those type of early stage startups or some startups that already have a customer success experience. I would be happy to talk in a way of a case study about a scale up that was Series B, actually, not that young anymore, but that was transitioning through the process.
Well, let's start from the beginning. When they came to you, did they already know that they wanted to transition the customer success team to own the renewals and upsell?
No, they just realized that their customer success team is very reactive. Like, they're doing the work, they're pretty good with customers, but they are not driving revenue. And very often, as it was in this case, those would be CEOs or co-founders that were listening out there about CS now being more of a revenue generating department rather than cost center. And very often they have received some form of awareness, not even huge education of how it should look like. And then they came to us to help them figure it out. So in this case, the CS team was something in between support and onboarding and still managing some adoption, but they didn't have the conversations about the renewals. So when I came on board, I started talking to CSMs and understanding what are their barriers and what is it that they are working on. And it turned out that they knew their customers. So there was a small team, there were 3 CSMs, and each had around up to 30 customers that they were looking after. Again, there was a whole section of other people who were looking more into very small customers, like the long tail accounts. So in this case, high touch environment, CSM were having up to 30 accounts, and they knew those customers, but they didn't feel that they should even own the conversations about the renewals and about the upsell, because they also had one person in sales who was apparently responsible for it all, simply because that's how they started. That was the setup, to make very clear line. But then there was not even enough resources from the sales side to continue doing it. So I started breaking down, why are they not doing it? So what are the typical activities that they do? And what I found out was those CSMs were amazing relationship builders. They were great technically, they were able to help customers on the spot, and they were continuously delivering value to customers in that way. But they were simply not thinking much outside the box to recognize the opportunities when customers wanted more. They felt restrained so much, thinking that there is some salesperson who should be involved. If there is any conversation about the numbers or contract, that it's almost not their territory, they shouldn't be even setting foot there. So we broke that barrier down in a way of responsibilities, because I believe that when CS team was working with customers so closely, they are absolutely best positioned to be responsible for renewals. They have it all. They have relationship. They already understand what customers is working towards. They know what is the value for them. It's just a matter of positioning. And in that way, when things are going well, that renewal is just only the outcome. So they should be empowered to hold those conversations. Other things that I realized, or we found out within the conversation, was that their mindset was very much fear-based. They were telling themselves, oh, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not here to sell. What if customer now doesn't trust me anymore? And those answers that everybody in CS, or most of the people, are thinking of. What will the customer think of me if now I mention that we have something else? So we started breaking those barriers, because in a way, we found out that customers were expecting CSM also to tell them about a new thing, to tell them about new features. And it was just the miscommunication. To give you the example, one of the CSMs had a conversation with a customer, And it was very much like support related conversation about what can be done and what can't be done in the platform. And the customer was asking for something more, almost untapping the possibilities. I was able to listen to the recording, and then I got in touch with that customer, and it turned out that that person was a bit disappointed that the CSM didn't recognize that they would be ready to spend even so much more money. Like they were already fine. They were using the features and they wanted to spend even more, but no one asked them. No one went into that conversation. No one was almost giving them possibilities that, yes, we could start looking into product of doing it. Like we could do something for you to spend more. So that was just a little lessons learned for the whole team, how they may have preconceived conventions that customers just don't want to even hear about particular things, or you're not even going in that direction, when, as it turned out, customers are absolutely happy to explore what else is there for them when they are seeing the value. For me, it's a common sense. I have seen it when I was a CSM, but sometimes it takes time, and especially if the team members are feeling that their responsibilities are very much boxed, that they shouldn't be even kind of tapping into somebody else's territory, for example, sales in this case.
Yeah, so it sounds like you inherited a situation where you had three CSMs, high touch model, but they all were sort of like branded as support and services versus somebody that owns the commercial in hands. They didn't feel like they should even have those discussions because that was the territory of somebody else, and they were being respectful about it, to the point that sometimes they would have conversation with a customer. The customer is literally indirectly saying to them, we want to buy more, and they would ignore the signs or feel uncomfortable to step into that path because it was not their job, and they didn't believe, given their professional background and their title and job description, that it should be their business of doing so. What do you think are some of the impact that this has had on the company?
Obviously, so much money left on the table, because if that was a situation of a one conversation that I was able to tap into, how many more conversations were happening when CSMs were just not recognizing or identifying potential opportunities? And I think that's happening everywhere in companies, very often simply because CSMs are told not to go into some territory or not to have commercial conversations. When at the end of the day, I believe it's all about the skills of asking good questions. And I call it discovery question. Even if it is 100 call with a customer, there is always something new to discover. CSM can always have the opportunity to ask more about the team and how they're using the platform. What is the other team they are working with on the same workflow? Who else can come using this platform, meaning there are potential upsells? What else they have to do with this platform? Like there are so many those little nuances that they can start understanding how the teams is using the platform and already identifying upsell opportunities without talking about it being an upsell, simply without coming from the stand of let's help the teams around you be even more efficient if you all work in the same platform. Like especially these days, it's a no-brainer as companies are trying to consolidate their tools. So you can always come from the perspective, what else can we use this tool for? And surely there will be many more use cases within the company where you can help the customers figure it out and even build some workflows around it for them.
Before we go into the how, it's been a few months since then, obviously. What are you seeing the results of that maneuver? Clearly, you changed the team, you made them own the financial transactions. We'll talk about that journey and how it unfolded. At the end of the day, what are you seeing some of the initial impact on that business since you've transitioned the team to own financial transactions?
There is a bigger impact on new business revenue because the fact that CSMs now took ownership of upsells and renewals meant that the sales team, that one person was able to focus so much more on generating new business, and they started to close opportunities faster. The average deal size didn't change a lot, but they simply started having a bit more customers than a few months ago. But for the CS team, there were so many different impacts, starting with financial impact. of course, that firstly identify more upsell opportunities, but then not only upsell in terms of the seats and the licenses, they started recognizing some of the services and training opportunities that they were potentially missing out previously. As soon as they started going into conversations of how and what else to do, the impact was that the customers wanted them to do more work for them, to start doing some managed services, to configure more things. So in a way, the professional services, like the department who was onboarding customers, they started having more and more consultative work, which brought new revenue. Financials on one hand, but on another hand, the confidence of the team, their ability to truly feel that they own the customer because they are owning almost every aspect of that journey, and the pride that they have in knowing those customers well, and now starting to not only have the conversations but closing multi-year renewals. That's a huge bonus for the team. That means that they are doing a good job, and now customers in result are locking down like 3 years renewal contract, which is an awesome accomplishment for somebody who didn't even have renewal conversations a few months ago.
How many of these team members actually had any kind of sales experience before?
None of them had any previous training. I recommended some of the sales training, and they started being upskilled in the sales process. Obviously, there are skills such as objection handling, negotiation, even the medic process, although it's not that relevant in a startup or scale up. Those were the trainings that helped them. However, we started with that mindset of what are their fears and what is holding them back from selling, what they think selling is versus what their customers want to see when it comes to selling, like what are the types of conversations that they want to have. And in that way, we were like breaking down some of the limiting beliefs that they had about their own skills, to the point how they realized, well, they are best positioned to simply match the solutions that they already have and that they know about to the customer's needs, because at the end, it was all about identifying more and more of the needs from the customers and what they needed in that moment based on their business objective and what our solution was able to provide. So it was more of like value-driven conversations, matching solutions with a problem. And I believe that was one of the shifts that helped them understand that, yeah, they are selling even a phone call, because it's not a given that customer will just join the call because CSMs arrange it in the calendar. I think those days are gone, and whoever still thinks that way, I feel they still maybe a little bit spoiled, thinking that customers will show up on a call just because it's in the calendar. No, so even selling a phone call with customer has to be done through selling. You have to help them understand the value behind it. So when they started realizing that everything needs to have a value proposition, every communication with customers need to have value proposition to explain some benefits and why, then they started realizing, oh, well, actually, everything that we do has value, or it should have value if didn't have so far, meaning that if customers are going for it, we are selling in that way. And then the outcomes of that process are the upsells and renewals.
What was the plan that you put in place to transition them to be from uncomfortable to confident? What were the parts of the plan, and how long did it actually take before you started seeing real results?
It was around 6 months of kind of weekly, bi-weekly training and coaching. So I put a training plan in place, and now I already started mentioning like mindset, etc. Yes, first few weeks we were touching upon the mindset, their previous experiences, their skills analysis, skill gaps, what do they think is missing. Then we were trying to put it in the context with their current leaders, like how do they rate those CSMs based on particular skills that are needed for a, let's say, commercial account manager or customer success. So we went through that kind of training plan from mindset to skills gap, skills analysis, skills gap, into upskilling. And then it came more kind of technical part of the training, meaning we put in place objection handling training, discovery questions training, trainings on how to negotiate, how to make yourself in a win-win situation, some very kind of sales technical trainings. We just did loads of role play. So we would just introduce the concept, and then as a team, we would be throwing out scenarios and practicing with each other. And that took some time, but I think that that kind of role play was exactly what was beneficial for them, simply because they started to develop their own talk track in terms of how they position the product or how they position some objections or some conversations. And having that written down and being able to practice immediately meant that once they were on call with customers, little by little, they can take some aspects of their talk track that they developed and start practicing with customers. Because at the end, nothing comes with just talking about it. It has to be done in practice on the calls. And that's why it was like around 6 months time through the whole process.
How did you track and measure change management, adoption of these new playbooks, if you will, and processes, and ultimately efficacy?
I needed to do loads of call recording, listening, just to start understanding what are the concepts that they are already using. So it was pretty manual process for me, but because that's not a big team, it wouldn't take so much time, but it helped me understand more where they needed some coaching. As we saw that from call to call, they were incorporating at least one of the aspects in the talk track, and then more and more, we just created a cutoff date by which they are owning renewals, meaning they can't bring in the sales anymore into the conversation, but they have to do it on their own. Almost as if you would have a new salesperson and you would onboard them, and then from one moment they are owning it, they own their book of business, and there is no help from outside.
We know that a lot of CS leaders sometimes take on all sorts of initiatives in their organization. They do a lot of great work. They're seeing the results. The team feels the results, but it's hard to communicate it back to the CEO. What metrics do you think the CEO should see in order to prove the value of those spectacular, by the way, project and initiatives back to how this impacts the company?
It was net revenue retention, number one. Then the typical GRR, but no, we focused mostly on net revenue retention because that was the metrics that the CEOs were just absolutely driving, and they knew that, CS team, it was almost under the microscope. So from week to week, we were just measuring because like that was the mandate. Let's increase net revenue retention. So yeah, that was the first one.
Absolutely. And the reason I asked about the metrics and the follow-up question to the net retention rate regarding the monthly revenues, can't track NRR week over week doesn't make sense unless you have monthly contracts, because by the time you install the initiative to the time that you see an impact in NR, sometimes it's 9 to 12 months because the contracts are annual. It takes a long time to see the impact on that retention rate. So a lot of times when I speak to executives like you, they have other metrics that they track. We call those leading indicators to showcase the results, but I could totally see tracking NRR week over week and starting to seeing the impact if you have at least some of them that are on a monthly recurring revenues, because then the impact is super quick.
That was the case with us, yes.
Listen, looking back, what were 2 or 3 things you would absolutely do again when you get another client? What were like the 3 things that were most impactful?
First thing is working with what you've got in terms of CSM. Just try to go straight into completely trying to understand the team. What are their skills? What is it that they are working on? And what are immediate ways that you can improve their efficiency? That was number one. Then number two, starting with more qualitative aspects of the team. So how are they working with customers? What is their mindset? Do they have any limiting beliefs that we have to remove? And then simply preparing like that, some of the training program that help them get to the point where we wanted them to be. For me, it all starts with the team that you have at hand.
Excellent. So mind shift, skill gap, and teaching them the right skills, not giving up on the team, but actually upskilling them and doing the discovery, understanding where they are, where do they need to be, and filling in the gaps with lots of good workshops. By the way, did you and your partner, Kate, deliver these workshops for the team? Sounds like you had like a lunch and learn with them and role play that you actually led.
Yeah, I was leading most of those role play, like the whole training. That was also part that informed my own course, which is a private podcast called The Revenue CSM. Loads of the practices that I would do with a team. ended up in the podcast at the moment. So now I have it for other customers as well.
That's amazing. You're so creative. So tell me a little bit more about this private podcast. Is that kind of like an online course that somebody can pay and then listen to? What does that include?
Yes, exactly. So when you think of the online course, it's typically you need to log into the platform and watch videos of somebody talking in front of you. Then when I found out, well, there is actually private podcast, I created it in that way, recording only audio, which means if somebody needs to listen about the mindset and how to do some things, they can walk out in a park. They can have some nice time processing what they are hearing without always looking at the screen, especially if there is no teachings in front of them. That's why I opted up for that audio format where people can just listen in small bites. And then I created ebook next to it, which is accompanying, which has loads of different templates for them to use, has all the transcripts from the podcast as well. So when they sit down, they can start working on it and they can start implementing immediately some of the aspects of the course, because there are, I think, 8 different templates there.
Wow. And this is basically similar training to what you've done with the CSM team through that 6-month period to get them to change the mindset and be comfortable to own renewals and upsells.
Yes, so it's very much that mindset change. And at the moment, when I work with new customers, I would firstly recommend listening to that type of training. So you start immediately with the mindset and then like workshopping with a team, with incorporating new trainings.
So the ones who should listen to the podcast is not just the executives and the owners, but actually the CSM team.
Oh, yeah, I would say it is firstly for the CSM teams. Yes.
Marija, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're so talented. It blows my mind. I'm so grateful and blessed to have you in my life, to have you on this show. I learned a lot, not just about how to transition a team from services and support to consultative and confident to expanding the relationship with clients. The path that you laid out is absolutely fantastic. And I hope you get a lot of new business out of this podcast. Definitely check Marija out. Check the private podcast, the Revenue CSM. Where can people reach out to you and what other resources do you recommend, Marija?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest option for everybody. You can find me there. I'm always happy to have a conversation about this. Other resources on Women in Customer Success website, there are some new training programs, and the podcast is a resource in itself for many people to understand what female leaders are going through and what are the approaches that they are taking in their career. But also, if I can say any other resource completely not related to customer success, for me, one of the favorite podcasts is The Diary of a CEO. That's the podcast that I think I'm listening every single week for sure. Absolutely brilliant content about sometimes running the company, but also running yourself and your productivity, and just loads of other fun things.
Marija, you're an outstanding woman, an amazing guest. I learned so much. I hope this inspires everyone who has a Series A, B, or just have a customer success team that does not own the renewals and upsells yet. I think Marija made a real strong case around why we should coach the team on sales skills and let them own it. And so, Marija, thank you for laying out the path for creating that success for the organization and open up a bandwidth for the sales team. Quite amazing. Appreciate you. Anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I hope that people will just find beneficial starting with the mindset and then understanding what happens next, because sometimes that's the only thing that you have to break through.
And with that, it's a wrap. I'll see you on the next video.